Okay, so today we're going to be talking about tetanus, and what tetanus is it's a condition in which the muscles contract uncontrollably. So let's talk a little bit about this, and it's probably one of the more interesting diseases that are out there. If you ever got a Tdap shot, or if you're a little bit older like me, they used to call it the DTP shot, and the T stood for tetanus. So let's talk about what it is. First of all, tetanus, like we said, it's a condition in which the muscles are going to contract uncontrollably. It's caused by a bacteria that is called Clostridium tetani. Okay, so Clostridium tetani, this is a rod-shaped bacteria, so it's a bacillus, and so here's my Clostridium right here. And it is also a gram-positive bacteria. So I'm going to color this in. And if you recall, when we said gram-positive, what we mean is that it is colored, it stains when you go through gram staining. So there it is right there, okay? And then it's gram-positive and it's a bacillus. Okay, so what happens with tetanus? Well, most of the time, I know what I want to say. Tetanus is also anaerobic. So that means it does not survive in oxygen. So when it's not inside of a person, or it's not somewhere safe, it's away from oxygen, what it will do is it will form spores. So our spores will look, something like this. And if you don't know what a spore is basically like a protective covering that bacteria put over them. You can almost think of it as like a seed, or to cover a shell on a seed. Okay, in this case, I'm going to have my bacteria inside there. So let me put my Clostridium right there. And then what's going to happen is when people have heard of tetanus before, what's happened is that they've always heard of rusty nails. Well, here's the thing about tetanus. It doesn't have to be a rusty nail to cause tetanus. It can be any cut. You can clean a kitchen knife, and 2 seconds later, you go to put it away, you cut yourself. And if you haven't been vaccinated, you can actually get tetanus. So here's what happens is, let's say we have this cut now, all right? So here's somebody's arm or their hand, right? And I can't draw, but here's their hand. And what happens is they get a cut. Well, now tetanus will enter into that cut. Now the thing about the inside of the cut is that the inside of most cuts are warm because it's your body temperature, and they're anaerobic. So usually the inside of cuts, let me use a different marker. I want to use brown for this. So they're usually warm and anaerobic. Aerobic. All right, so they don't have oxygen. So what's going to happen now is my Clostridium is going to get inside of here. So here's my Clostridium, right? And it's inside these spores. And I'm going to actually draw this a little bit bigger. No, actually, that's okay. So I have my little spores there. And eventually what will happen is my Clostridium will break out. So there's my Clostridium. All right? And then it's going to start to reproduce, like most bacteria do when they get into a certain environment. So it's going to start to reproduce and reproduce and reproduce and reproduce. And then what it's going to do is it's going to release a toxin. The tetanus bacteria does not move from this area, but it releases a toxin called tetanospasm. Okay, so it's going to release tetanospasm. This is what causes the problem. So here's my tetanospasm being released by my Clostridium tetani. Okay? Normally when your muscles work, as one muscle contracts, the next one relaxes. Okay? And then when that one relaxes, the other one's contracted. They work opposite each other. Right? What happens in tetanus is the muscles on both sides contract, and they don't stop contracting. So how does that happen? In your body, I'm going to just move this over here just a little bit. So in your body, in your nervous system, you have some cells. Let's erase this. You have nerves. Okay, so here's here's a nerve, right like this, and then this nerve is going to come out, and we're going to have this nerve come out, and it's going to go to this muscle. All right, and then there's my muscle spindles. Okay, now the way it works is usually an electrical impulse will come down here. It's going to make that muscle contract. In fact, what we call this is an alpha motor. Motor means it controls muscle. All right, so it controls muscle. All right, it's an alpha motor neuron. So there's my alpha motor neuron. This is going to make muscles contract. However, we don't want our muscles contracting all the time. So what you also have is a type of cell. Let's do this in green. It's kind of the opposite. So, and then you're going to have, coming off of this, we have dendrites coming off of this. Okay? So these are dendrites. So what's going to happen is you are going to have basically cells, neurons, that see how excited these are. And what these will do is they will inhibit these cells right here. Okay? They're going to inhibit these cells. So when they inhibit the cell, the muscle relaxes. All right? So we're going to call this an inhibitory neuron. All right? So there's my inhibitory neuron right there. I'm going to move this back over this way just a little bit. There's my inhibitory neuron. Okay? And I can have them attached to here too. Okay, so, but we're just dealing with this one here. Now, inside of this, I'm going to draw this now. And I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. The way it works is like this. By the way, and this is called the Renshaw cell. Okay, so this inhibitory neuron is called a Renshaw cell. So inside this portion of my Renshaw cell, this is it here. I'm going to have something called a neurotransmitter. What the neurotransmitter will do is it will cross this little gap right here. All right, it's going to cross that little gap that's right here. And then when it does, it kind of makes this relax again, so muscles will relax. Make sense? So we don't want the muscles contracting all the time. So this says, hey, wait a minute, I'm finding out there's too much going on over here. So I'm going to release my neurotransmitter to basically calm the cell down. So the way it normally works is my neurotransmitter comes out, goes through here, and inhibits that. Inside of this part here, I also have little proteins that are called snare proteins. All right? So these are going to be called snare proteins, S-N-A-R-E. What's going to happen is normally the snare proteins will grab the neurotransmitter, and then or grab this vesicle. The neurotransmitter is inside something called a vesicle. It's going to grab it, and it's going to have it come over here, and this vesicle will fuse with this membrane and release the neurotransmitter that's inside. So the neurotransmitter goes across there. Does that make sense? So now I got the neurotransmitter here, right? So this gets a signal from here saying, hey, it gets a signal from here. This basically says there's too much going on over there. We need to calm this down so that muscle can relax. And so what happens is it sends this signal over to do it. And this is the way it normally works. You got the snare proteins that are going to grab onto this. I'm just going to put little hands on there or fingers. It grabs it, it pulls it this way, and the neurotransmitter comes out. In tetanus now, like we said, tetanus is going to release the tetanospasm. And so what the tetanospasm is going to do is it is going to come down and basically destroy these snare proteins. It will destroy these snare proteins. So now, what happens is this neurotransmitter no longer is released. And if that's not released, there's nothing to slow this down. And so it just keeps contracting and contracting and contracting. Okay? And that's what's going to happen with tetanus. So our Clostridium comes into the body, usually through a cut. Doesn't have to be a dirty nail, doesn't have to be anything dirty, just a cut. From the cut, the Clostridium gets inside, it's released from its spore, and then what the Clostridium does is it goes and it destroys these snare proteins that are responsible for pulling that vesicle with the neurotransmitter towards the side of the cell, so it can release the neurotransmitter, so we don't have that going on. That will cause this to continue to contract uncontrollably. Now, the next thing is, the first place that this is usually going to affect is the jaw. It's not uncommon for tetanus to be called, lockjaw. It's called lockjaw. Okay? Because that's the first place it goes to affect. So what's going to happen is that the jaw's going to lock, just like it sounds, right? The other thing that can happen is it can cause the back to arch. The muscles in the back start to contract, they start to arch, and it's called opisthottonus. If I remember correctly, actually, I think it's an O, maybe it's an A. Okay, so it's an O. So opisthottonus, okay? This is arching of the back. Okay, and it's, normally what happens is that the person goes backwards, obviously. Okay, so we got lockjaw, we got opisthottonus. The other thing that can happen is the contractions can become so bad that what will happen is you can actually tear muscle or break bone. Okay, so contractions can tear muscle or break bones. Now, normally, once symptoms start with this, what happens is what happens is it's not untreatable. Okay, for the most part, it's untreatable. Usually what they do is they put people to sleep, basically, and they wait until they die. Eventually, these will affect the respiratory muscles. So eventually it affects the respiratory muscles, and when it does, the person dies. Okay, now I've seen some books that say it could also affect the cardiac muscle. I've seen some books that say this only affects skeletal muscles. So skeletal muscles in your respiratory system are what's between the ribs. Okay, so that's pretty much it for tetanus. And the one thing is the vaccine is a toxoid. So in other words, most vaccines will go in and kill the bacteria or build up an immunity to the bacteria. In this case, what you're doing is you're actually getting a toxoid. So you're actually getting something that goes and neutralizes the tetanospasm. The vaccine is a toxoid that neutralizes the toxin. And like I said, the toxin is called tetanospasm. Okay? So that's about it for tetanus, and I hope you enjoyed this. Okay, and as you can see here, you can see the clenching of the teeth. You can see the hands are clenched, the elbows are bent, and obviously there's a lot of discomfort there. This was one of Napoleon's soldiers who got tetanus, and as you can see, this is opisthottonus. You can see the arching of the back. Notice the clawing of the toes also. All the muscles contracted, the teeth are still contracted. Eyes are bulging. So this is opisthottonus. This is another condition that can happen due to tetanus. It's called rhesus sardonicus. And you can see there's clenching of the teeth. It's a weird looking smile, unfortunately, but this is due to the tetanus causing all the muscles in the lips and then the jaw to contract.